Remi Garde. A recognisable name if you are an Arsenal fan and, unfortunately, if you are an Aston Villa fan. In the 2015-16 season, what would near enough be unimaginable now, Aston Villa were looking more like an outcast of the Premier League rather than a team in contention of Europe, as they went through arguably one of the most shocking and downright weirdest slumps in English football. A great and historic club which I have had the fantastic opportunity to visit, Aston Villa were one of the ever-present names to facilitate the top level of English football, let alone the Premier League. However, we do not see Aston Villa as a club who has only since been part of the Premier League since 2018, as they were promoted as such. Before then, Aston Villa had been in the top division since 1988, creating a wealth of talent since then, such as Dean Saunders, Dwight Yorke and David Platt. However, it changed drastically in 2015, where it was nearly unimaginable how bad they performed that season, where 4 separate managers took the helm at Villa Park. We will look at all 4 of these managers individually on how they performed that fateful season, but there is one who we will look at a bit more in depth at, as Remi Garde, the man who won the Coupe de France and the Trophée des Champions with Lyon in between his tenure of 2011 to 2014 and his 147-day botch as Aston Villa manager. Jeff Stelling made a great icebreaker on this topic. Let's set the scene. It is the 19th of March 2016, the day Aston Villa got relegated from the Premier League. Conducting a quick snap review, Jeff Stelling points out the numerous elephants in the room. Quote, "You sell Benteke, Delph and Vyman. You don't replace cleverly. You let Ronvlar go. You buy a clutch of French players no one has ever heard of. You sack the coach. You replace him with one with no Premier League experience. You get relegated. There you go." A few points here that really do tell the story. Selling important first-team players, signing unknown players who may not have the necessary personnel to learn from who have experience in the Premier League, and you sack a manager with one who has never managed in England before, let alone a Premier League relegation battle. Now, that was near enough the end of the season, but that's great and all seeing the consequence of these decisions. But let's now move further back in time to the start of the 2015-16 season. It is the 1st of July 2015. Tim Sherwood has been in charge of Aston Villa since February of that year and had somewhat helped Villa avoid relegation, finishing 17th after claiming 10 points from their last 7 games. Additionally, he helped Villa reach the final of the FA Cup, losing to Arsenal 4-0. Sure, Villa just avoided relegation to the Championship. They were one stone's throw away from lifting the FA Cup, but these were on paper signs that things can improve and he can build on. Micah Richards, an English talent who burst onto the scene in his younger years, joined on a free, and Scott Sinclair joined on a permanent move after his loan with the club. Darren Bent left to join Derby, but they had their main talisman in Christian Benteke. It couldn't go wrong. Right, so first the captain Ronvlar leaves on a free after not renewing his contract, literally on the 1st of July. A little over 2 weeks later, Fabian Delph does the infamous U-turn into joining Man City for £8 million, where on the 11th of July it was tweeted on the Villa website, quote, "There was no way I was going to bail out. I am here for the long run." Bear in mind, that was 6 days before his transfer. On the 22nd of July, Christian Benteke moves to Liverpool as his £32.5 million release clause was activated. Right there, the literal spine of Aston Villa was yanked from its throat. Ronvlar, Fabian Delph and Christian Benteke, all gone. Not to mention Tom Cleverley, who was an ever-present figure the previous season. Obviously cover needed to be bought, and not just cover, solid first-team players to replace the array of talent. 4 players from the 9 who were brought in were from Ligue 1, a 19-year-old Adama Traore, a costly £6 million to Blackburn for Rudy Gestede, and on a free, Julian Lescott. Only 2 players from the 9 brought in had Premier League experience, one of which we will talk more about later, and the other having the same amount of knee cartilage as Rey Mysterio. Obviously, Tim Sherwood had a job on his hands. Their first challenge was Bournemouth at the start of the Premier League season, and fair play to them, it started the best way possible. Spoiler alert, it went straight down from here. But at least Gested scored on his debut. After that win, up to the 24th of October, Aston Villa lost 8 of their 10 games during the season, drawing once as well. With 4 points from a possible 30, Tim Sherwood escaped after a 2-1 loss to Swansea at Villa Park. This didn't help in any way, however, as they were knocked out of the League Cup by Southampton. So, how were Aston Villa going to fix this old pickle they've put themselves in? Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Remi Garde, who signs a 3.5-year deal. Collectively, with a 50.5% win rate with Lyon, Remi Garde evidently was a winner, not only of matches alone, but also of silverware, previously highlighting his French trophies. Randy Lerner, the chairman of Aston Villa at the time, pointed out how Aston Villa are way behind their competitors in Premier League survival, already pointing out the aggressive nature of their summer transfer dealings. When you lose pivotal personnel like your star striker, integral midfielders and your captain in the defence, you're sure to panic within some capacity. Remi Guardiola, nicknamed by the Lyon fans, was primarily seen to instill some belief and flair from the recently purchased French stars, costing collectively £28 million. Man City was the first test for Remi, which he somewhat came out unscathed, as Aston Villa held on to a clean sheet with a 0-0 draw, ending a 7-game losing streak. Both Aston Villa's defence and attack at this point were non-existent, as from game week 12 they conceded 20 goals, and Gested is the top goal scorer with 3. From the Man City game, it took another 3 games to claim their next point against Southampton away, and before the end of the year, they collected another 2 points with draws against Newcastle and West Ham. Sure, they were losing not as many games as when Sherwood was in charge, but they haven't won any games yet. Once 2016 came to, Aston Villa has won 1 game, drawn 5 and lost 13. Whatever changes they had made from the 1st of July, it had gotten bad to worse, with the greatest respect to Sherwood and Garde up to this point. A 3-1 loss to Sunderland began life in 2016 for Villa. However, a miracle happened. A second win of the season, and Guardiola's first for the club. Unfortunately for Wayne Hennessy, his own goal for Crystal Palace gave Aston Villa all 3 points, but did not budge them from the bottom of the table. 2 draws against West Brom and Leicester came after, making it 3 games without a loss. It was progress. 2 clean sheets, 2 goals from 3 games. Surely this is where the revival begins. A 2-0 loss to West Ham was next. However, a 3rd win of the season, beating Norwich 2-0, making that 8 points from 15. Definitely progress. Surely this is now the revival point. They lost 11 games in a row. They conceded 32. They scored 7 goals. It was their 6th loss, however, from the 10 in a row that Remi Garde lost his job at Villa Park, giving him 2 wins from his 20 games in charge. Quick math, that's a 10% win rate. From that win highlighted against Norwich, Eric Black took interim charge of the club, which had also been taken by Kevin MacDonald once Tim Sherwood had left prior. It was game week 25 when they claimed their 3rd win of the season, and it would be their last, as from the next 13 games up to the end of the season, with 39 points to be claimed, they only managed to get another 1 point. Make of this what you will. Make of it as the chairman and board making the worst decisions imaginable to a well-established club. Make of it the wrong personnel to manage the club as a whole. For me, this is up there with Derby. not necessarily due to the points tally, where Aston Villa claimed a mere 17 points compared to Derby's infamously terrible team of 11, but instead of players who feared seeing who they would be playing against next. You had players who had arguably no passion or grit in them whatsoever. Right after the 0-6 loss to Liverpool at home, Joleon Lescott let the world behold a picture of an expensive Mercedes on his Twitter page. Joleon claimed it was accidental, as the picture was sent while he was driving. Yeah, I don't think that's how pictures are uploaded on the internet, mate. Joleon became a meme from this. Ideally like Dominic Cummings, where he exclaimed he drove 260 miles from London to Durham with his wife and son, and an additional 60-mile drive around Durham to test his eyesight, rather than abide to the stay-at-home rules he devised with Bojo during the COVID lockdown. Not only did this show of the Aston Villa squad that they did not hold accountability of the wretched season, but they didn't take responsibility in understanding how this would feel for the Aston Villa fans who have supported the club for many decades, and for those who are beginning to feel a love for the club and sport. So, in the end, like Jeff Stelling said at the beginning of the video, important players being sold to rivals and contracts not renewed, an influx of French talent which were not well equipped pragmatically for a relegation fight in the Premier League. You give the manager 10 games to try and work his magic into integrating the new signings into the club. You then bring a new manager who has no prior experience in working with a club who had previously just survived the league. You give him 20 games, which is rewarded with 2 league wins during his tenure. And you have a new signing who felt compelled to post on his social media account a fancy Mercedes, while he then uses the excuse of butt uploading. All of this rewarded Aston Villa 17 points in the 2015-16 season, 22 points from safety, and a minus 49 goal difference. Shocking. Ultimately, it was not just one action which had created the demise of Aston Villa's Premier League status in 2016, but in fact a myriad of reasons. Firstly, the most easiest answer is results. As I mentioned earlier, Remi Garde was relieved of his duties with Aston Villa with 2 league wins under his name from 20 matches, giving him a 10% win rate. Sure, it isn't as bad as Mick McCarthy's 5.4 win rate in the 05-06 season with Sunderland, or Paul Jewell's infamous 0% win rate with Derby, but it is not writing any punters home for him to get Aston Villa out of this rat-edding time soon. Remi Garde picked up wins against Crystal Palace and Norwich, who are themselves struggling throughout the season. Secondly, allegedly, his training methods and approach to games were undermined by senior players within the club, where him exclaiming that his players lacked the desire to accomplish survival surely won't have him expecting birthday cards throughout the post. There was no clear connection between him and the Aston Villa supporters, not encouraging them to stay at matches, more so as some fans are highlighted to leave games with 15 to 20 minutes left to spare. Once Remi Garde left, Aston Villa were 12 points from safety, further solidifying their position in the relegation zone, rather than have a fantastic manager bounce. However, one decision, which was the most damning, which we have covered throughout this video, is the transfer dealings. We've put into detail about the summer of 2015, but what about the winter of 2016, when Garde was in full swing of being the Aston Villa manager? Remi Garde offered some new names to the board who could add some flair, grit, determination and belief to the squad, such as Wabi Kazi, Loic Remy, Seydou Doumbia and goalkeeper Lovre Kalinic. No one joined that winter. Ultimately, his time in the club was characterised by struggles, including a poor run of form and ultimately his dismissal. But let's not take any responsibility away from the higher-ups who made these decisions. Lerner exclaimed after the dismissal of Garde, quote, "Remi arrived with honesty, humour and a steely sense of what it will take for Aston Villa to be what it is meant to be. Hard-working, tireless, creative and unwilling to concede." Very hollow coming from the man who, by definition as an owner, is responsible for the player contracts which enable other clubs to sign their top talent and enabling the funds for scouts to pick the best and most appropriate talent for the task at hand for the season. As such, in May of 2016, Randy Lerner agrees to sell the club to Chinese businessman Tony Xiao and his Recon Group following confirmation of their relegation to the Championship. From August 2006, when Randy Lerner bought the club, Martin O'Neill was in charge, inheriting a team that had just avoided relegation with David O'Leary. Their rise to prominent top table and European contenders were evident. To a decade later, where they entered the Championship season from September 2016. A mighty downfall, if you will. Ultimately, Tim Sherwood did not have the tactical capabilities to manage a team like Aston Villa for long, and Remi Garde was a 147-day botch in the making. But let's conclude with a simple proverb on how I would summarise the downfall of Aston Villa nearly a decade ago. A fish rots from the head down. Thank you if you have made it this far into the video. I would like to think as I'm making more and more of these videos, I am becoming more distinguishable from other football YouTubers, considering there is only so much you can do in terms of content with kicking a ball into a net or to another person. Let me know what you think in general with Remi Garde and Aston Villa as a whole. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you soon.